Oh man. Oh, live. Okay. Looks like she said it was gonna show on the screen. All right. Well, great. Good to see you guys again. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Green Party Series podcast. I'm your host, Gokhan Cukurova, stepping in for the one and only David Rich, who couldn't be with us for tonight's episode. I'm going to try to do my best, although I am well aware that I cannot fill in his shoes. I have two of my old friends, Morgan and Joshua, small farm owners here in Illinois. They will share their story, their experience with us, but they do come from a different background. It will be interesting conversation, I believe. I'm sure you're gonna all enjoy. So welcome, guys. How are you?
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're doing well.
Thank you. You look a little tired. It's gotta be the I don't mean no harm, but farm life, right? I guess it's been hot.
We've been farming all day, so it's a sweaty enterprise over here.
Living the dream, I assume.
Yes.
All right. So, you guys want to tell me how you ended up being farmers? When I first met Morgan, she was taking my studio lighting photography classes at the Chicago Photography Center, and she was in psychology. And then next thing I know, I photographed your engagement and then your wedding, and then poof, you disappeared. And then you came back. Hey, we are farmers. What happened? Tell us about it.
Sure. So I'll take this question. You are correct, 100%, right on the money. I was on a track to become a mental health counselor. And I did, in fact, finish my master's in mental health counseling here in Chicago. And I was working as a emergency crisis counselor in the emergency room, so seeing people in crisis all the time. And that was, no surprise, quite emotionally draining. And Josh's job, right after I had finished my master's, moved us to the East Coast. And I was already burnt out on mental health counseling. So I decided on a whim to just get a job on an organic vegetable farm. And the rest is really history. I loved working outside. I loved being involved in my food and having a physical job. So I spent the next 3 years in New Jersey working on a variety of different farms. And then at that point, Josh was missing his family here in Illinois. So he's like, hey, let's go back to the Chicagoland area. And I said, hey, let's buy a farm.
Right.
So we bought some acreage here in the south suburbs of Chicago and started an organic vegetable farm.
What year was your wedding?
2015.
2015. I still remember the grandpa, moms, dads. It was a very memorable wedding, and so I can't blame him. My family is in Minnesota, so missing them. I know the pain. I know the pain. I know. Where is your farm?
Yeah, so we are about 15 miles from where I grew up. We're in Monee, Illinois.
Okay.
And so it was about as close as we could be to family and have land to farm.
Mm-hmm.
We like to call the area sub-rural. Certainly you were 3 miles west of I-57. So you get on I-57 going north and you're immediately in the busy suburbs,
Mm-hmm.
Matson, Homewood, and then, beyond that, just about 30 miles to the city.
So you're not way out of the city. Great. How big is your farm?
We've got 10 acres of land. However, we're farming about 1/4 of an acre. So we're really doing an intensive vegetable situation on a small footprint. And the reason is that long term, we'd like to plant the rest of our acreage with perennial food crops like fruits, nuts, berries, the types of food that will just keep growing year after year, instead of with the vegetables, every year we have to plant them. And so it's very labor intensive. And we're trying to find ways to have the farm be slightly less labor intensive.
Okay. How long did you say you worked at a organic farm setting when you guys were away from Illinois?
Yeah, in New Jersey. So I worked on a variety of farms for 3 years in New Jersey. And those farms included organic vegetable farms that were selling mostly to farmers markets. I also worked on some farms that sold directly to restaurants. And then I also worked on some farms that grow medicinal plants and herbal things. So they were growing more of the elderberries and the lemon balms and the mints and things that you can use for teas or tinctures, or more of like a medicinal purpose than a food purpose. But that farm showed me that farming doesn't have to be just, corn and beans and tomatoes. Farming can include tree crops and berries and herbs and things. And so that really opened my eyes to a different perspective on what farming really means.
What is really organic farming for you? I remember, like when you said New Jersey, it brought me a memory. You might remember, I was over the road truck driver for 1 year, and quite often I would go to upstate New York and taking some stuff from Wisconsin and drive it up there. And one day I went to that Purina factory, and I was delivering some products. I believe it was a cow food, but I remember having a what's those guys? Amish guy with his little horse carriage cane. Yeah, he came and he loaded up a lot of bags similar to what I brought in, and then he took off. So using, we usually know or hear Amish stuff is all natural and whatnot. Would that go into organic farming? Would that qualify or not? What is really organic farming?
Yeah, so organic farming, so there's the formal organic certification. That's a USDA program, and it basically means what you're putting in it's natural. It's not developed in a lab. It wouldn't necessarily come from what I'll call big chemical. So not to single out any individual producer of herbicides and pesticides for those conventional corn and soy farms. But those products are very much lab generated. It's researchers, it's scientists. It's more or less taking chemicals and mixing them to get a desired output, generally killing things. Organic really focuses on building your soil and building up an ecosystem that's full of life. So if you think about, soil and it's where everything comes from. It's what's feeding your roots. It's feeding your plants, whether it's the tree across the street that you like to look out your window at. And so organic farming is following strict practices to make sure that what you are buying in terms of seed are non-GMO, they're harvested naturally, and then the inputs that you would use, primarily for us, it would be leaf mulch or plant-based compost to get our nutrients into our soil. And so those practices are rebuilding the soil. It's eliminating those harmful chemicals that have also been shown to harm humans, harm animals, harm the ecosystem. For us, it's really about farming in a sustainable way and giving more to the land than we're taking out of it. So
Right.
we think of farming as, you know, we hope to do it for the rest of our lives. It's very labor intensive. But ultimately, generations from now, we want people to look at our property and be able to say, like, you know, see the blood, sweat, and tears that are fueling, you know, our soil and our plants.
Awesome. Thank you. Joshua, you had business background. So when Morgan was working in farms in New Jersey, you were still working at your other job, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I worked for a Fortune 50 company, so a very large global financial services company. And I went through an executive leadership program. So, you know, we met you. I was working for the same company, but here in Chicago. And the executive leadership program was a rotational opportunity where I did 3 different jobs over 3 different years by design.
Mm-hmm.
And then also had formal business education, executive presence, public speaking, negotiating. And it was great. It moved us to New Jersey. It opened up doors that I don't think would have opened if we didn't pursue that opportunity. But there was something, I would say, missing. You know, when I talked to Morgan and I'd see her at the end of the day, yes, she was exhausted. Yes, she was covered in soil and sweaty.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this joy that you just, it was this glow, and you could tell that, you know, the farming was fulfilling for her.
She wasn't mentally drained. Is that
Correct.
yeah?
Physically exhausted, but I think, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was that mental and healthy fulfillment of toiling away in the soil and seeing the fruits of her labor. Something that's often challenging in mental health work.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes you're treating individuals for something that they're suffering from. And there aren't a lot of cures. Not a lot of people have a mental illness and what I'll call graduate out of it. It's typically something they manage,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a plant that starts as a seed and, you know, grows up. Here's a fruit, and now you have that fruit of your labor, and you can see the end.
Mm-hmm. So your background, I'm sure, helps a lot with you guys growing as a small farm. If you didn't have that background, what would be the biggest struggle in terms of running it as a business? Because this is what you all do now, right?
Yeah, and I think one, having that security the first 2 years of our business. So the first year we were organized was 2020. It was a pandemic. Morgan actually did some consulting work under the business name for another farm. And that was sort of a business pivot. So you're starting this new farm and boom, here's a pandemic. Nobody saw it coming.
Right.
There are no farmers markets. Sorry, we're not growing anything. And then year 2, you know, Morgan did start growing. And I think from a business perspective, we knew how to set the stage to have a product. So the silver lining for us in the pandemic is we spent the whole year building up infrastructure. I was still working what we would call off farm in that corporate setting. And it provided us with a lot of opportunity to be able to take risks farming and just establish things that I think if you don't have a business background, maybe you jump in the deep end and try and find your floaties.
Right.
We sort of took it with some floaties on.
Right. Morgan, I know you guys don't have chickens, or you don't sell eggs, do you?
Well, we actually
last time
we didn't have chickens when you were here before.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
but
I don't remember
that is one addition that we have made to the farm. Actually, is we've got 48 baby chicks that are currently living on pasture in mobile chicken coops that we can drag around. And they have a job here. Their job is to help with pest control. So we have them actually moving in their mobile coops around our annual vegetable beds. And that way they can really help to kind of gobble up some of the pest insects that we have around. And they also eat like the weed seeds that are growing. So they're really, earning their keep around the farm. But those chickens are mostly going to be for meat. So we're growing them to be meat food later. But we do have a couple hens in the mix too. So we'll have eggs as well. In the meantime, we are selling eggs from another local farmer that lives right around the corner from us that has thousands of chickens on pasture. And so that's a partnership that we've actually developed over the last year, where they have an abundance of eggs. So we help them to sell them. If we have an abundance of vegetables, they'll help us to sell those. So I think having partnerships with other small scale farmers is one of the biggest needs really to make a small farm business survive, because you can't do it all necessarily. But there are other people out there that can maybe fill in some of those gaps.
Help each other out. And how great it is that, every animal has its own purpose in nature. They clean out. It reminded me on the 4th of July weekend, we were sitting outside and my 6-year-old daughter, she saw some bats flying. And she's like, Dad, are they gonna, are they gonna be dangerous? Are they gonna drink blood? I'm like, no. If you see them, they're doing a great job eating mosquitoes. They all have a purpose. Speaking of farmers market, actually, I have a question right before that about the eggs. Do we import eggs from China, really?
I don't know.
I've heard that. Do you?
That's a great question. I actually don't know. I know that we do have large egg production facilities in our country that oftentimes have a lot of chickens in less square footage than they probably should. And that alone is a challenge that I think small scale farmers are really trying to overcome, because to have a healthy, beautiful flock, you need more space than what many of these mass producers are willing to commit. They'd rather they're trying to squeeze the egg out of the bird instead of giving the bird space to.
You addressed that far more politer than I would have. Yeah, I heard that and I was appalled by, like how come, the big corporate farming ruined everything and still doing a great job of ruining it. And tell me about the farmers market you go to. Where is it? What is it called? What days are you there? How has it been working for you guys?
Yeah, so we currently sell at 2 farmers markets. The first one is the Homewood Farmers Market, and that's every Saturday. Homewood is a south suburb of Chicago. That's the area where Josh grew up. And so that's why we decided to start our farmers market there, because we had a natural market. His whole family lives in town. And so we knew they would support us even if no one else would. But luckily, other people have turned up to the market. So we have a regular following there in Homewood of customers that come to visit us every Saturday. So that market runs from May to October. So we are right in the peak season right now here in July. And we're just starting to bring like some of the summer crops, tomatoes and things. So that will really boost market sales, I think, as we head into like true summer and fall crops. And then our second market is it's called the Gathering Market, and it's at Tulip Tree Gardens, which is another farm in Beecher, Illinois, which is a little bit farther south of Chicago. But this particular market is every Thursday evening, and that's from 4 to 8 p.m. And what's really great about that market, I can let Josh speak to it, but it's at this other farm. And so there's a lot of rural amenities, including chickens and farm dogs and what else they got going on at the gathering?
Yeah, so the great thing about the gathering, as Morgan mentioned, is it's on a farm. They practice regenerative farming, share a lot of the same values we do in terms of repairing the soil. They've got goats and pigs. Their hens sort of I'll call it run wild. They're free range hens. They walk around the market. I often have to shoo them away. We have an agreement. If they eat my produce that I'm trying to sell, they're coming home with me and they're going to be dinner. But it's a great fun for the family, live music.
There's always food. They cook up food from local vendors. Yeah. So there's local meat vendors, there's local cheese vendors, local vegetable people. That's us. And so at the market, they'll actually prepare a meal with something from all the different vendors and serve that as the food. So it's really a celebration of everything local. And it's just a fun night out. So if you're ever in the Beecher area on a Thursday evening, that one goes through September, I believe. So every Thursday evening, 4 to 8 p.m.
I've been telling myself and Carolina as well, one of these Saturdays or Sundays, I mean, I get your emails and we're going to surprise you like, hey, you know, it's quite a hike for me, but trust me, we will. One of these days we'll make it. Many years ago, maybe like 20 years ago, I had a stand in a farmer's market, and I was selling my photography. So it's a completely different thing, but it was a farmer's market, and they allowed me to sell my art there back in St. Paul. Tell me about farmer's markets in general. Like, is it, in your opinion, is it struggling? Is it becoming more popular? Where is this going, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, I'll first just say that Josh had to do a quick irrigation change. So he is swapping the irrigation right now. But with regard to farmers markets, I would say that immediately after the pandemic, there was definitely a boost in farmers market sales because everybody was wondering, you know, well, we had all these supply chain issues, right? And so everyone was wondering, how can I get food without having to deal with the supply chain? And so the answer is, you know, get it from people who are growing it locally, who don't have to, you know, wait for a distributor to be able to bring the food somewhere else, to a grocery store, for example. Okay. And then I think more recently, though, at least with our farmers market, it does seem like that initial pandemic interest has sort of flattened out or maybe started to fall off a bit. It seems like we're all sort of settling back into like, oh, I can just go to the grocery store if I need XYZ instead of supporting those local growers or producers. So I always encourage anybody who eats food, which is everybody, right, that we should really be supporting those who are producing it at a local scale. If not only because it tastes better, which it does, because it hasn't traveled thousands of miles, it also keeps your money within your local community, because if you're spending that dollar with a local farmer, they're then going to be able to spend that dollar, you know, with someone else in the local community. So it really keeps money in your local community where you need it and can see the most benefit from it, instead of sending that money to, you know, the large corporate grocery stores or distributors who are, you know, everybody takes a piece of the pie along the way. And so I encourage everybody to always shop local when possible.
I couldn't agree more, especially with the taste. You know, like when my wife leaves the kitchen early morning, you know, where are you going? Oh, I'm just going to grab a cucumber, just fresh from there, or parsley or tomato, and comes right to the table from the backyard, and it tastes so much better. But also the satisfaction, you know, satisfaction that we worked for it, and it's coming from our backyard. And of course, can't do everything like you did, but whatever you sent me home with, it was like so delicious and so fresh. So even the smell of it, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
I think Josh and I both didn't like tomatoes before we started farming because we thought a tomato is a weird thing at a grocery store that's mushy and has no flavor.
right,
Then you eat a tomato fresh off the vine. It's like a whole new experience.
exactly. What do you think would make farmers markets more accessible?
Well, for one thing is there is some money in our state towards matching SNAP dollars, and so if more farmers markets were accepting of SNAP funds, that would basically there's funds to double a person's money if they're using SNAP at a farmers market. But
Interesting.
not all farmers markets accept SNAP. So it's like the money is there to
Hmm.
help people purchase locally. However, it's not filtering down to the places where, you really need to be accepting those things.
Do
So
you think there's a reason for them to not to accept SNAP? I mean, if it's going to bring more money, more business, more people to farmers market, why would they not accept it?
Yeah, so one of the challenges with farmers markets is a lot of the organizers, the farmer market managers are volunteer positions,
Okay.
and this SNAP would require a captive person to be able to swipe link cards. So in Illinois, we call it link. Different states have
Got you.
their state programs. So it requires that extra person doing labor. I will say we aren't we don't have the match available, but we are passionate about making sure produce, specifically local, nutritious, and delicious produce, is accessible to everybody. So we are an approved SNAP vendor, and we do take it.
Hmm.
It's just if people had that match, I think it would be easier because then more vendors could take it. Typically, it would be how I've seen it run is it's like a token program. So there's a booth you go to, you swipe your SNAP, and you get tokens. You can use those tokens at any eligible vendor, even if that vendor is not directly approved because the market's approved. And then the match program is specifically for produce. So it would allow those dollars to not only go to farmers like us, but it would take those and, the local bread baker who's, making delicious sourdough out of his home oven could also benefit from those dollars. And they're your tax dollars at work. I think people are like, oh, taxes or welfare programs. SNAP is a great program, and it takes that federal money, it gives it to a local business, and oh, by the way, I still have to pay sales tax on that dollar.
Right.
And then we spend that dollar in the community, and all of a sudden, those federal dollars help Illinois a lot, and they accelerate the value of that dollar for us.
The brain surgery, right?
Right.
I would say another thing that would help boost farmers market attendance is probably one that's not really, it's kind of outside of control, which is weather. So I always notice if it's raining, people don't go to the farmers market. Like you have a few diehard customers that are like, ooh, I've got my cute raincoat, my little rain umbrella. I'm going to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the most average person is just going to not go because it's raining.
Right.
And so farmers work in the rain. We're used to rain. So we are still there. We're still at the farmers market if it's raining. And we've still brought a beautiful array of local, delicious vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of people don't like to get wet.
I remember going to the farmers market in Logan Square when we lived in Chicago. It was walking distance from us, and great experience. It was just grab a bite there and grab some locally grown vegetables and go home and start cooking. Another question for you: 10 years from now, where do you see the Fox at the Fork?
It's a tricky one, Gokhan.
Well, she'll be 15. She'll probably still be barking and ornery. Oh, sorry. The fox is our dog, for those who don't know. It's a reference to our dog. I think you mean the farm more than the dog. So I think for us,
he hasn't changed.
ideal situation is really to have those perennials planted and to be more caretakers and stewards of the land. Harvesting fruits and herbs and flowers that we aren't planting every year. That really becomes a labor of love instead of annuals, which are arguably a labor of necessity. They definitely, the things we want to grow in terms of trees don't have the same immediate connection to people. So I'm talking things like elderberry, aronia, persimmon. So like I'm naming native fruits that aren't staples, like say an apple or a tomato. So there's that. And then being more education focused. We already do a lot of events. We try to do at least one charitable or education event per month. Long term, we'd love that to be more on farm and really teaching people about rebuilding the soil, how to do gardens at home, how to plant more natives and focus on perennials. My mom and I have somewhat of a running joke. She always complains about the weeds at our farm. And I'm talking things like plantain, creeping Charlie, which is a beneficial, it's native. She has what I would argue is the largest weed in our country, and that's just a traditional Kentucky bluegrass. That is not native. It was not meant to be here.
Very little benefits in terms of pollinators or, ecosystem establishment or that sort of thing. I think we've kind of figured out that, growing food is contagious, right? Like I have so many people come to the market and they see the beautiful display and they're like, I want to grow my own food. Like, how did you get here? How did you do this? And it's hard work, but it's something that anyone could do. And even as little as like 50 years ago, everybody was growing their own vegetables. And it's this misgeneration of knowledge really that got lost where we stopped growing our own food. And so now we're all like, whoa, I could grow cucumbers. And I think we really just want to encourage more and more people to give it a try.
Right.
You don't have to get it right the first time. It doesn't have to be perfect. Your cucumbers might be small or they might be weird looking, but they'll taste so good because you grew them, like you were saying. And so we just really want to find ways that we can encourage more people to engage with food, whether that's growing it, whether that's learning about it, whether that's trying new foods they've never eaten. Just encouraging people to, take part in their own food.
If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah. Well, and us too, because like we didn't grow up farming. Like we are both psychology majors, right? Like, so if we can do it, so can anyone else.
99% of the work is by my wife, but it's like you said, it's contagious. Next door sold the house and moved away, and new owners came and they started talking Carolina about her vegetable garden and all that stuff, the raised garden beds and whatnot. Next thing you know, they moved in last September or so. Now they are growing their own, and we take care of their garden when they go away. They take care of ours when we go somewhere. But it is definitely most delicious stuff you can eat. And if I left my wife outside all day long, all weekend, working hard, raining or not raining or hot, she would not complain 1 second. Not at all. Not at all. In 2019, I'm gonna bring this to a question that I'm gonna give you a little backstory. 2019 marked my mom and dad's 50th wedding anniversary. And me and my two brothers, we surprised them with a trip to Michigan. And even though they didn't attend, my brothers stayed in Minnesota. We brought mom and dad here to Chicago, and we sailed out of here, went to Michigan, and stayed in a farm. My father grew up in a farm. He was helping his farmer father until he left for college. So I thought it would be a good experience for him at this age. He's now 84, and also it would be a good experience for my children. So at this farm, children were allowed to help the farmer every day, and they really enjoyed that experience. So did I, but I was more proud of providing that opportunity to them. My question is that do you guys offer that kind of activities, events, or anything like that to other families, or do you plan to? You talk about it, or what do you say to that?
Well, right now, not really.
Mhm,
It is something we definitely want to pursue in the future.
mhm.
Our biggest hang up at this point is kind of parking. We have to figure out how to have more than like our vehicles here. But, and also setting things up in a way that's very user friendly. Because right now we have a lot of like tripping hazards, and the insurance people would not be thrilled for us to have like children out in our current state. But I think there's a lot of opportunity with kids, because kids are so naturally drawn to food crops. You just show them that a cucumber starts as a flower, and they're like, what? They're just immediately engaged in a way that some adults are, but kids, it really feels natural.
Well, and we've been fortunate to have some of our nieces and nephews visit. A couple of them live out of the country, others live out of state, and to see the look on their eyes and the excitement they have to harvest spinach. They have these spinach muffins that they bake at home with mom, but like they came to the farm, they walked through our field, they harvested spinach with us, and then they helped us bake their spinach muffins. And it's just, I don't know, it makes me feel 20 years younger. Not physically, but at least mentally, when I see young kids enjoying what we're doing. And so I think for us, like, that's part of the 10-year vision is how do we get, not just adults, but children here, and that kid who's, gets real excited about, not just growing food, but then, there's a customer of ours, we learned he bought some pepper plants from us, and then he got really into making hot sauce.
There you go.
And so it's just this trickle effect or domino effect of here's the food, you can grow it, but oh, by the way, it becomes many of your favorite things that you're eating at home.
Right, not just one thing. Right.
So.
I also really distinctly remember my niece pulling carrots out of the ground. Like, these carrots were so little, they were not anything to be impressed by. But she was like, oh my God, it's a carrot. I pulled it out of the ground. It was like this big moment for her. And she dreamed about it. She told me the next day, she's like, I had a dream. I pulled a carrot out of the ground. It was like monumental in her development. And so we would love to have more moments like that. We're not quite there yet. And we have to figure out how to get there.
Sure, it's like planting the seeds into their hearts and those memories, and some of them will stay with them forever, I'm sure. Maybe
Totally.
they will become farmers.
Yeah, hopefully. We could use more farmers. The average age of your typical farmer, I believe, is 65. So one of my favorite little fun facts is that Josh and I are the combined age of the average farmer. And we really do need more young farmers, right? Because we're going to get to a point where people who knew how to farm are no longer with us. And then it's like, oh, what are we going to do?
Do you see yourself getting more acreage in the future?
It would have to be very strategic. I mean, across the street from us is a 40-acre conventional farm, and I dream of the day we can afford to have access to it, whether it's leased or owning it, simply so there aren't chemicals being sprayed across the street. We aren't at risk of spray damage. But I think for us, it's really focusing on how do we start that perennial dream. The annuals have been so labor intensive, and I think we found, especially this year, that we don't have as much time as we'd like to work on installing the fruit and nut plantings, outlining and defining what those education events would be. So how do we tackle the parking lot? How do we define, what types of events we're going to host? We do that in the off season. But the off season is also times when you're doing crop plans, you're closing the books. So it's like, yes, I would like more acreage, mostly because I would like less acreage to be used conventionally today, right?
It's not really that we want more acreage. We just want less acreage allotted to monocrop, chemically infused corn and soy.
Build the wall. So
build a wall. There you go.
The wind damage.
Yeah. I think I've also been surprised with regard to the acreage question about how much food you can really grow in a small amount of space. And you've probably seen this with your own garden, is like, there comes a time when even if you've only grown a couple zucchini plants, for example, you are swimming in zucchini. You're leaving it in your neighbor's cars if they leave their, doors unlocked or whatever. Or cucumbers too is another one where it's like all of a sudden you have way too many cucumbers.
Right. I remember I was maybe 12 or 13 visiting my cousin's farm, southern Turkey. And they were doing, almost everybody is financially forced to do more conventional farming. It's not like back in the day when my dad was a young kid. But I remember everybody was having a good time. All of a sudden, my cousin back then, he was maybe like 30 years old or so. He came in crying, and he grabbed a shotgun. And it was like, what happened? His favorite hunting dog ate a dead animal. The dead animal ate something poisonous.
Yeah.
And the animal was suffering, so he had to end the misery. But as an 11, 12-year-old kid, I still remember that. Forget about just slowly damaging our own DNA, our own health, our children. The quicker, more imminent dangers of using all the pesticides and whatnot. And like, you're driving down the highway and the windows down, you have no idea the guy was just spraying an hour ago, and then, oh, nice farm air.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of that too is that all this corn and soy that you see growing and being sprayed by chemicals is not even for human consumption, so we allot a lot of land here in the United States to crops that are not even feeding America. Yeah, go for it. I know you got your
I'm a big stats guy. I like having data. So you'll often see politicians, lobby organizations touting Illinois' prowess in growing corn and soy and pumpkins. and being, global leaders in those crops. 95% of the food we eat in Illinois is grown outside of Illinois. That means only 5% of the more than $40 billion Illinois food industry takes place in Illinois.
Only 5%.
Yeah, right. And that's crazy. So those are the things we're trying to work to overcome is we were at least one point in time, Illinois was known for having some of the best soil in the world. And maybe we still do. I imagine most of it has been harmed with chemicals and at the expense of even being able to grow food, right? We're sending it to make biofuels or animal feed. We've separated the animals from the land. And I could go down the rabbit hole on this one, but I'll pause there and see if that's really the direction we should go.
Do you have, can you name one country that would be a great example for United States to follow if, if say, the Green Party USA takes the whole Congress and okay, we're done with this corporate farming, corporate this, corporate that. We're gonna go back to the roots. What country we would show as an example, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know about with regard to how much percentage is grown locally, but I can say that a lot of the tools that we use, which are small scale farming tools, come from either Japan or Korea. And that's because they can't do the large scale farming there. Usually it's associated with topography or that sort of thing. But because of that, they've had to develop these small scale human powered tools, and most of their farms are going to be a smaller scale. And I think it's when you start bringing in this idea of bigger is always better, which is classic America, right? That you run into trouble, because it's just the farms got bigger, 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 which meant you needed bigger, bigger, bigger machines in order to manage them. And that requires fossil fuels, right? It requires just a management practice that is large. And if you really bring it down and start focusing just on that smaller scale, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and I don't think we have to look outside of our borders. I think we need to just look to our history. 200 plus years of United States of America. 13,000, I believe, is about the number of years that they've tracked the history of indigenous people who are living here, feeding themselves, eating here.
Right.
I think we need to really just look at how they were doing it and what they were doing, and build better relationships with, your neighbors and your small farmers, and trying to help and feed each other and lift each other up. And that, at the end of the day, there's a lot of knowledge that I think gets overlooked, that's available right here. I think a lot of indigenous people would be willing to have those conversations if you're willing to open the door,
right.
And to listen to them. So it's not just, asking them a question and taking their idea. It's really understanding how they feel about it, right? Like, we're sitting here, Caucasian backgrounds, first generation. So for me, it's really listening to those people and understanding what they're willing to share, and not just appropriating it to be the next, capitalist billionaire.
Right. I mean, there was a reason for my question. Of course, I experienced that in my country of birth, that how major American agriculture companies coming in and doing business with farmers in a small scale. And then by the time I finished high school, they weren't even allowed to use uh, their own seeds. They started, losing their land, or they weren't allowed to do follow their own old uh, farming uh, skills or methods. So it's, of course, just like the thing we call the military industrial complex. eh, Same thing in farming, right? It's big money. It's about profit. Who cares about your health? Health companies, hospitals, and insurance companies will take care of that end. Me getting a stent, $67,000, all the crap. So interesting conversation to go in there. Uh, that's why I asked what country, because like at the end of the day, before the industrialization, farming was the way of life for majority of people. But like, I wanted to see if there is a country that I don't know of that they still do most of their farming with traditional methods. But yeah, I think that would be the right way to do. I believe going back to that would still be a big challenge because the monster won't go down without a fight, right?
And it's effortful. And I think, especially in America, we've become accustomed to things requiring little effort. And so, when you ask someone to put in some effort for something, that requires a bit of a mental shift, I think, in our
Yeah,
country.
yeah, yeah. Hold on one second. Yeah, yeah. Once I'm done with that, I'll put the effort in.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Is there a quick, easy button I could push and I'll get all the results I want?
Just like wedding photography. Remember, a lot of people would expect me to turn their wedding pictures into magic with one filter, uh, not realizing sometimes I sit 2 hours on one photograph to make it a really, truly fantastic black and white. It's not just
It's a lot easier when you've got good
Models.
good models, right?
right, right, right. I'm looking at two of them, right? Uh, so, where can people find you if they want to learn about, um, maybe get some advice or get some real good food? And actually, I just remember before you tell us where people can find you, um, what do you grow currently? And out of those, what is the most labor intensive? And do you deliver to local, like your neighbors and whatnot? Do you just have a certain day? Hey, these days, if you need anything, let me know. We'll just do a little drive around, and you need anything, we'll grab it and bring it to you.
Yeah, so we can be found on the World Wide Web. You could Google Fox at the Fork, but our website is foxatthefork.com. Wow, look at that. It's right there. See it down below. Beautiful. And that will give you all the information about where to find us and whatnot. But if you prefer to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, then you can find us on Saturdays at the Homewood Farmers Market from 8 to 1 p.m. or on Thursday evenings in Beecher at the Gathering Market at Tulip Tree Gardens from 4 to 8 p.m. We do also deliver locally within 7 miles of Moni, Illinois on Saturday afternoons. So if you live within 7 miles of Moni, you can go onto our website and pick out your produce, and then we will bring it right to your door, farm to door delivery service.
Yeah, and then we collaborate with two other farms. So actually, Tulip Tree Gardens, they own a Village Farm Stand in Evanston, Illinois. So Tulip Tree will purchase produce from us and deliver it to the village farm stand up in Evanston. We also collaborate with Cockadoodle. Cockadoodle is the egg grower or chicken, egg layers farm that we collaborate with. They are a newer business trying to grow local food delivered fresh. So I know they have a limited area primarily focused on the west and southwest suburbs of Chicago right now, but they continue to grow, and that's an e-commerce platform that their model is delivery. We have a salad subscription option on their website, and then when we have extra produce like kale or zucchini, things like that, when you get in bumper crop, they'll also sell those as one-off purchases.
And then right now we're growing over 40 different types of vegetables on our small acres. So I'll save you the trouble of listing every single one, but some of the popular items right now at the farmers market are our salad mix, which is just an assortment of lettuce freshly harvested. We also do other greens, including arugula and kale, spinach when it's cold enough. It's been a very hot spring, so we don't have any spinach right now, but once it gets cold, we'll have spinach again. We do an assortment of root crops, beets, carrots, turnips, radishes. Those are always popular. And then we do, everyone's favorite summer crops. So tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini. And then one of the crops that I think really sets us apart that we grow that I don't know any other growers in Illinois doing is fresh baby ginger. So the ginger you find at the grocery store, it looks brown and shriveled and, kind of sad. That's because that outer brown skin is indicating to you it's been sitting there for a while, basically.
Oh, really?
When fresh ginger comes out of the ground, it's pink and yellow, actually. It's beautiful. No skin. You don't have to peel it at all. So we sell that fresh baby ginger at the farmer's market. And that shows up. It's usually in September or October.
And it's not necessarily labor intensive. But it does take a long time. We start the ginger seed in our greenhouse in March. It moves outside in June. Well, it moves into our high tunnel in shade cloth in June. And then we won't harvest it until September. So it takes up a lot of space. Although it's beautiful, it's fragrant. I like to rub my fingers on the leaves and you get that nice aromatic ginger smell.
Tomatoes are probably the most labor intensive crop that we do because they require like a trellising system that we have to install. They need regular irrigation. They don't want to do a lot of competition with weeds. So you have to make sure we keep the beds nice and clean. So they're very labor intensive, but everybody loves a farm fresh tomato. So it's probably well worth our effort.
Right. I mean, it sounds like... it's like a song to my ears. All the descriptions and smells and rubbing the leaves and everything. So don't be surprised if I send you a Google map showing Itasca.
7 miles.
Within 7 miles of Moni, Illinois, and I'll ask you guys to bring something. But for the effort, I'll cook you some Turkish food. How about that? Look at that. That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything do you think I should have, would have, could have mentioned that you would like to add?
I would say one thing that we just didn't really touch on at all, but is something we're involved in, is we're also active members of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, which is an alliance of local eaters, food producers, distributors, people who care about local food in Illinois. And as part of that organization, we've set up farm tours with our local senator. And so we're getting involved politically, having, the senator out to our farm so that he could see what, we're dealing with here as local farmers in Will County. And also Josh got to go to the Capitol to help and advocate for climate smart farming practices this spring as well. So
yeah, and I actually went to both capitals. So I was down in Springfield for a day meeting with the local politicians in our district and in other districts, sharing the importance of the state investing in local farms. And then I also traveled to Washington, D.C. To meet with our federal representatives and to share our story directly with their staffers and their offices, so they can really understand how investing in local farmers is investing in our country. It's the most important thing we can do for the future, for climate change, for the health of our nation, is to feed ourselves.
Awesome. Morgan, can you repeat that organization, the Stewardship?
Illinois Stewardship Alliance. Yeah.
Illinois Stewardship Alliance. Okay. I'll look them up. I never heard of them. I'll look them up.
Anyone can become a member, and they'll keep you really up to date on the various local food stuff going on in our state. So highly recommend.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for coming on, sharing your story, sharing your experiences. I miss you guys. Thank you for everything you said, and best of luck to you on your journey. We'll stay in touch.
Thanks,
Yeah, thank
Gokhan.
you.
Yeah, we loved being here. Thanks for inviting us.
Mhm.